I don't know who wants to go first. I think it's Dr. Palmer that wants to come first. Dr. Palmer, why don't you come on up? Welcome to Juneau. It's nice to have you here.
Wonderful to be here. Beautiful as I was flying in. I enjoyed it.
Great. Go ahead and put yourself on the record. That'd be your name and affiliation, if any, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman French and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My name is Margaret Palmer. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak today. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland, and I'm also director of the National Science Foundation's Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center, which is located in Annapolis, Maryland. I've been researching streams and watersheds for over 25 years, and I'm an expert in stream restoration and have dealt with a lot of work on the impacts of surface mining on streams. As you know, PacRim Coal has proposed a large mining project in the Chuitna River watershed. It's a 25-year project that will impact a very large tract of land, not only due to the footprint itself where the mining will occur, but because of all the infrastructure and access needs for mining, such as roads, buildings, etc. Those impacts will affect fragile wetlands and destroy 11 miles of salmon streams, as the chairman noted. So I'm here as a scientist to describe what I believe is overwhelming evidence that the impacts will be irreversible simply because the reclamation is not technologically feasible. So I want to make 3 points in my statement. One deals with the nature of the reclamation examples that PacRim provided. The second deals with the difference between stream creation and restoration. And the third deals with the failure rate of stream restoration. So with respect to point 1, PacRim put forward a number of examples that they suggest are evidence that reclamation of the wetlands and the streams lost due to the project here is technologically feasible. In fact, if you look at those examples carefully, they provide case studies on sites that were only minimally impacted, nothing like the kinds of impacts that would occur if the project goes through at Chuitna. Their examples are in watersheds that have intact headwaters. They're dealing with streams that are still connected longitudinally, and they're ones in which the groundwater flow paths are still intact. In fact, most of the examples they give are for sections of a stream that have been degraded or diverted. In the Chuitna case, with mining up to depths of more than 300 feet, the entire watershed will be destroyed. Existing groundwater flow paths will be gone, and wetlands that feed the streams will be lost. So the examples that PacRim cites are not cases where entire headwaters and streams are gone. They were not examples where streams and wetlands were mined through down to bedrock with huge earth-moving equipment that disrupts fragile layers of organic-rich soils and ancient rock layers, such as shown over here in the diagram. With respect to the second point, what PacRim is proposing is nothing like stream restoration as is commonly practiced today. Instead, it is an attempt to create a stream de novo. The salmon streams will be completely destroyed, leaving deep pits or trenches. Mining waste will then be moved into those to fill those. And when mining is complete across the entire watershed, PacRim will dig ditches and hope that water flows into them. So that will be the nature of the streams that are created. This is not restoration. In practice, stream restoration actually varies along a continuum where the easiest is removing ongoing impacts and then letting the stream recover on its own. For example, preventing point source pollution from going into a stream. That's one example. Then another of a stream restoration along that continuum would be enhancing, for example, in-stream habitat by providing extra wood in the stream or replanting riparian vegetation. And this is done typically on an otherwise healthy stream. And then at the extreme for stream restoration, you're talking about manipulation of an existing channel, so maybe creating another bend in the channel or regrading the banks. But under the plan proposed for Chuitna, there won't be any remaining channels to restore. They'll be gone. Simply digging ditches and hoping that water will flow to them does not create a living, healthy stream that supports insects, fish, wildlife, and of course certainly not salmon.
Dr. Palmer, let me just ask you
Sure.
a question, and I'll invite other members to jump in at any time. Are you aware of any other project in the world that has been conducted or done under these similar circumstances, where you actually remove a stream and then recreate it after a number of years?
In terms of anything successful, absolutely not. And in fact, I led a project that created the first comprehensive national database of river and stream restoration in the U.S., and there's 38,000 restoration projects in that, and there's not a single one that falls along these lines at all. As I said, it lies outside the realm of what's scientifically considered restoration.
And Senator Wielikowski.
What's the plan? What is the mine company planning on doing with the current stream? Are they diverting it or just?
No, they will dig through the stream all the way down to bedrock and below, and so the stream will be gone.
What happens to the water that's coming from upstream when it hits that big hole?
Well, you should probably ask the hydrologist about that. I don't know what the hydrological flow paths will be, and actually that's part of the problem, is that the existing flow path is destroyed. And you'll hear soon from one of the other scientists is going to comment what is and is not known about those hydrological flow paths.
No, I've been pondering Senator Wielikowski's question myself. What happens to the water that's got to flow into that? I mean, this is a large area.
Yes, it's a huge area.
Right, it's like 10 miles of stream, and so there's all sorts of associated water flowing into that sort of drainage. What becomes of it?
Well, to even begin to answer that question, you'd have to do a lot of work to try and determine exactly what the structure of the groundwater flow paths are right now. It's extremely complicated. As you'll hear, there's a lot of faulting, there's complex flow paths. And even if we knew those, it's not clear what would happen after the...
Can I just get some basic
Sure.
parameters? How big is this stream? Is it, a couple hundred yards wide? How deep is it? I mean, how big of a stream are we talking about?
Well, it's a stream large enough to support salmon. I don't know the exact width of the stream, but they do migrate up in there. They dig redds for laying their eggs. And in fact, what you'll hear from Mr. Traskey is that the groundwater that upwells from the existing flow paths that are there now is what keeps the water warm enough to allow the eggs to survive through the winters that are obviously pretty serious in Alaska. So if you disrupt those flow paths, even if you get water to flow to the stream, so let's say they could line the channel somehow and create slopes so that water flowed down, you would not have those flow paths necessarily to try and keep the eggs warm enough to survive through the winter so that the young fish hatch.
So salmon eggs need groundwater.
They do.
I didn't know that.
Yep, they do.
We're learning.
They do. So I had one more point I wanted to make, and then I'm happy to answer some more questions. And that is that there actually is a very high failure rate on restoration projects that are far simpler than what they're trying to do. And so what this means is that large-scale failure at Chuitna is inevitable. I mentioned the project I led where we looked at 38,000 different projects. Many of those attempted, were basically just attempting to, as I said, regrade stream banks, perhaps plant riparian buffers, and of the extensive publications that have come out, particularly in the last 10 years when the field has advanced significantly, that is the field of stream restoration. There's a long list of studies, and the failures typically include inability to restore even the insect community that would be necessary to support the fish. So the fact is really that the current status of technology for stream reclamation is limited to small scales, usually at single reaches of a stream. It's only useful in intact water networks, and it's certainly not designed nor tested for situations in which the underlying soils, geology, and associated groundwater flow paths are destroyed. So I just want to summarize by leaving you with my view that there's no evidence that reclamation of the streams and wetlands in Chuitna is feasible because of the extensive nature of both aerially and with respect to depth. And there's strong evidence that, in fact, it's not feasible based on rigorous science in which really much simpler projects have not necessarily led to restoration, particularly of salmonids. So the current technology that has been successful in watersheds to date are much more modest projects. So you should recognize that if the watershed is mined as proposed, you will not regain the salmon populations that frequent the streams now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Further questions for Dr. Palmer? Maybe just tell me what your, remind me again what your position is with the National Science Foundation.
Yes, I am the director. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland, and the National Science Foundation wanted to fund a new center to do state-of-the-art research on environmental issues to balance the needs of people and the environment. And so I received a $60 million grant from the National Science Foundation to direct this center. And we just opened our doors about 6 months ago. So it's an international center that hosts researchers from all over the world, certainly from Alaska, to come and do work there.
We're honored to have you here in front of the committee
Thank you.
today. It's a privilege. Thank you. Senator Wielechowski.
Thank you. I'm just looking ahead to one of the other presentations we'll see, and it looks like there are about 30, maybe more permits and authorizations that the mine would have to get in order to do this. And are you saying that among these 30 permits and authorizations that the laws are not sufficient to protect the reclamation of a salmon stream like this?
That's correct. While I'm not going to pretend I'm familiar with the permitting process in Alaska in detail, if my understanding of that, and it's similar to other states, is that there's a lot of individual requirements, but that there's not any form of a comprehensive evaluation that would put all the pieces together, and certainly not one that would evaluate the kind of comprehensive mitigation plan that I expect could be proposed if a file is put in place.
So,
Of these 78 independent stream restoration projects, do you know, did they go through this extensive sort of NEPA process and permitting process that this stream would have?
For the ones that were done in the United States, they absolutely did. Some of those were also done in Europe and Australia. But absolutely, they did. So I've also worked fairly extensively looking at projects in the Appalachian regions of West Virginia, Kentucky, where there's a lot of coal mining going on. So I'm pretty familiar with the kinds of projects that have been attempted.
thank you. Senator Coghill.
Thank you, and I appreciate you coming up here. And the, I tried to do a little bit of research before we got all this. I must confess, I didn't get all this information until this morning, so I'm way behind the power curve on this. But from your perspective on the National Science Foundation, is your perspective to protect the streams at the cost of any human activity, or is it fish habitat, or is it biological integrity? I think one of the concerns that many people have is that no activity is what a lot of people want, and people are the problem, and nature is a solution.
Sure.
And so help me understand the perspective.
No, I totally understand your point. And first of all, I need to be clear that, my role is not to say, what's good or bad. It's to try and tell you something about the scientific evidence of whether or not you're likely to get salmon restored under the present plan. I do not think all human activities should be stopped, or I wouldn't have received this award for this new center. I believe strongly that we have to be pragmatic about the decisions we make, and we have to balance what the benefits and costs are. But I also think we need to be scientifically honest about what's possible and what's not. And so I'm just trying to provide information based on all the research that's been done to date.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, this is the first time I've actually had a chance to look at the Chuitna, so there's no way I could make any kind of judgment calls on this. So I'm trying to keep a very open mind. But I've also been a participant in many things in Alaska where huge kind of economic interests clash, and we can have experts on either side. And so that's one reason I wanted to know what your bias was, if there was any, and because notwithstanding this particular project, we're going to hear similar arguments on every
Sure.
project in Alaska. And so I'm trying to get a context to it, so thank you.
And just to make one response back, and I appreciate that, and what I would ask is that you try and look at the evidence that's supported by the peer-reviewed literature, because at least you have some sense that that's been looked at by the scientific community, and it's not coming from a specific perspective one way or the other.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just maybe one more sentence about peer review and what that means, and then Senator Wielechowski, and then we're going to have to move on, but go ahead.
Sure. Well, the concept of peer review is simply that when a project is done, when a scientific study is done and it's written up, it is then sent out to other scientific experts that are in the field who evaluate it anonymously and judge whether or not the information that's presented in there is done in an objective way. That's very different from a report that comes from someone that has been hired by a particular company to evaluate something and they don't show data. I mean, nowadays to publish something in the peer-reviewed literature, you actually have to be able to provide your data, the original data. And the National Science Foundation now has a requirement that that data be publicly available and be posted on a website. This is not something that's real common when you look at reports that are produced for companies, whether or not it's for something considered positive for the environment or something that others might consider negative.
Thank you for that. Senator Wielechowski.
Yeah, again, just looking forward to the administration's presentation, and they cite Alaska law. Well, first of all, Alaska law is that there has to be a reclamation plan, and part of the reclamation plan has to be stream replacement. And then what they say in their performance standards, reclamation performance standards, is that stream channels disturbed need to be reestablished, stable condition, or location. And so I guess my question is, are you saying it's just impossible to reclaim this, or are you saying that it is possible to meet the law? The law must be established in a stream channels disturbed need to be reestablished in a stable condition or location. Are you saying they're capable of meeting the law, but the stream will essentially be dead? Or are you saying that it's just impossible to meet this legal standard?
Well,
Do you see what?
I understand, except I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to
Well, maybe.
Welcome to our world.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know who the expert is. Maybe there is one or not.
To me, the key word is stream, and, you can have a stable channel, a stable ditch, but that doesn't create a stream with the kind of organic material and so forth that will support a salmon population.
Next question.
Senator Coghill? Yeah, on that point.
Sure, on that point, so in your extensive surveys, I know that in Alaska we have had meandering rivers for years and years and years. We have actually had whole new streams set up where spawning did occur that had not previously occurred. So in restoration, is that something that you have studied out, that in a more sterile stream that spawning has been reset? I think we have a couple of incidences in Alaska I think that we may be able to point to. And I was just wondering if this particular case falls into that type of a study group.
Right. Now, that's a really good question. Yes, there are success stories for restoration. The big difference there is there aren't success stories of restoration where the entire watershed and the source of the water flow and the ground flow patterns have been totally destroyed. I mean, we're talking going down more than 300 feet, going through bedrock. Stream restoration deals with surface processes. You may add a channel, meander, and reconnect it, and you may get salmon moving from that. That's nothing like what is being proposed in this particular case, which is why I said this is outside the realm of what's considered stream restoration or reclamation.
I wish we had another hour for you, Doctor. We have several other witnesses, and if it's...
Yeah, and again, maybe for another witness, but I'm just trying to get, is it, because we ultimately, I guess the commissioner ultimately has to set a bond number if he goes ahead with this. And are you saying it's just impossible to do this, or could you do it with some enormous amount of money?
In my judgment, it's impossible to do this.
It will be impossible to restore this.
That's correct, which is why I can't imagine how you'd set a bond level on it.
Okay, thank you.
I guess you ask for an impossible amount of money.
Yeah, perhaps so. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.